a lot of people dismiss the whole idea that UFOs are aliens on the assumption that, the conclusion that, it's just so crazy unlikely a priori. There's just no point in looking at the evidence. It's just crazy unlikely. And so that was the question I tried to address. How crazy unlikely is it? Is it crazy unlikely or just a bit unlikely? And if and what's the most likely story that could explain if it were true that UFOs are aliens?
Today's guest is Dr. Robin Hanson, a renowned economics professor at George Mason University. Known for his pioneering work on prediction markets and the Great Filter Hypothesis, which explores the mystery of why we haven't encountered advanced alien civilizations. His background in AI, Bayesian statistics, and hypertext publishing adds depth to the investigations into the unknown. Now join us for an intriguing discussion blending academic rigor and extraterrestrial mysteries. This was an amazing episode to shoot. Thank you again, Dr. Hanson, for joining me for this conversation. This is, of course, the Caffeinated Cryptid podcast, and I'm your host, Bobby Dizzle. I invite everyone to subscribe to the podcast, be it via audio or visual, and of course, follow me on social media. All ways to watch, listen, and follow are, of course, in the description and at bobbydizzle.com. Subject, and since you are a professor, I wanted to clarify that this was valid since it's from Wikipedia, but do you really plan to have your brain cryogenically frozen upon your death, or is that...
That's what this is for.
Okay.
It's my medical alert tag that arranges for that.
Okay, I saw that. I'm like, that's on Wikipedia, so I'm going to run that by him first. I don't know.
Yep.
So that could just be a throwaway line. Are you going to do it for to become revived in a couple hundred years, be like a bicentennial man, or is just to have...
Yeah, the idea is to come back if you can. I mean, yeah, the odds are against it, but still, give it a try.
That's badass.
Hey, any of you can try. It's not that hard.
I know. Now I kind of want to do it. I was like, or is it to be like a scientific specimen for future scientists or something? But yeah, to come back is much cooler.
Well, you said I have this book, The Age of M, Work, Love, and Life When Robots Rule the Earth. And it describes a world that may or may not exist. But if it does, well, I'll be the guy who wrote the book about their world. So they'll want
to be a god to them.
Yeah, come on.
Be a god to them. Did you know there's like a conspiracy theory that, very loose conspiracy theory, that Disney made the movie Frozen so people quit Googling Walt Disney Frozen?
I didn't know that. But...
And so when this conspiracy theory goes like they made Frozen, so if you Google Disney Frozen, it would quit showing results for Walt Frozen.
Well, if they had, I could see if they had 5 different possible titles for the movie, then this could be a factor that would weigh them on one of them. Sure.
I don't know what else they would call it. It's literally about Frozen, but sounds good.
Could be ice.
But in the Age of M, in the cinematic universe of the Age of M, for lack of a better term, I know it's nonfiction. In the scenario of the book, is there also an AI growing like we would know it, or is the M's, are they kind of like a steampunk version of AI? Like, will AI be developed in that world?
Well, there are 2 at least different ways you could achieve human level intelligence. And the Age of M is describing one of them as reaching human level before the other. So the other one's still there. It's just not as advanced at that point. So, before then, presumably we'll have lots of AI like we have now, and it will slowly be taking over jobs and tasks and doing more things. But the assumption of the book is when we finally can do brain emulations, there'll still be lots of things humans are doing. So there'll still be lots of things the M's could do. And then after that, AI would still continue to take over tasks from the M's, but there'd be a world of M's because there was a world of humans just before them.
I'm just picturing the little bitty fast M's just going nuts in their little cities.
Yeah,
that needs to be a Netflix series. Like I know it's meant to be a scientific and a good future hypothesis, but it's almost funny to think about.
Right. Well, I mean, I think I've said that the book is like science fiction, except there's no plot and there's no characters, and it all makes sense.
Yep.
It's that last part that's the hard part. But I mean,
it all makes sense.
It would be a fine place to set a story. But I've talked to science fiction authors, and honestly, they're not that interested in just having a foreign alien environment that's realistic. They choose their settings for the morality tale that they want to tell. And so the structure of the world is tied into the kind of, heroes and adventure, etc., that they're trying to set up. So if you just give them a real world, that's a little hard for them to work with, because now they have to invent all the other stuff without being able to mess with the world.
So yeah, now it's no fun. They're just living a life from day to day. They're just M's working.
Well, yeah, as you know, in our world, we have this real complicated world, and telling stories hard because you have to make your story fit with this real world you're in.
There has to be a problem, or nobody's like, well, this is boring.
Right.
This is. I kept getting wrapped around the axle when I was going through it. I'm not all the way through it yet, because I started it before we went to the beach, and then the beach happened, and I forgot I was reading a book, and then came back as I gotta rip that Band-Aid off. But I kept thinking it was a virtual world that the M's lived in, and they were kind of doing like a Westworld, but they're real things. They're real robots.
Well, they can be both, is the key point. So for desk jobs, sitting in an office, they might as well be in a virtual reality office. There's not much point in making a real desk and a real door, etc. But if they're dealing with real stuff like driving or managing a factory or drilling oil or something, well, for that they need to be dealing with the real physical world, so they'd have a real body to match the world they're dealing with. So it depends on how far from the world their experience is. That is, if they're just like most of us sitting in an office, it's a our office is basically a virtual reality. That is, we make the surfaces and everything else the way we want them, according to indulge us. They aren't very tied to some outside reality. So for M's, when they're in an office, it might as well be whatever they want it to be.
And like we drive to an office to get on the internet. When we can stay home and be on the internet, but we drive 20 minutes to get there.
Fewer, though, do it as used to.
Yeah, I was like, why don't we keep driving in here to get on the same internet we had at the house? This is stupid.
Right. Of course, you're trying to interact with your colleagues, and it does usually help to have some personal interaction with your colleagues.
But like I said earlier before we got started, this podcast sort of has its roots planted in the in high strangeness and subsequently paranormal. And it's been said, technology so advanced is indistinguishable from magic. Have you given any thought to like the phenomenon maybe that we experience, like some of the, I don't know how deep you go into it with some of the cryptid hunters and the UFO hunters and some of the spirits see the orbs? Could that be some kind of technology that so far advanced that we think it's just some kind of weird happening in nature, but it's actually just their way of traveling from may or may not be another dimension?
Well, I guess it depends on just how much of your world you think is full of strange, very advanced things. Like if most all of it was, then it's kind of weird that it all looks so dead. It's like, look, a lot of the universe around us looks pretty dead, right?
Nice
even the moon looks pretty dead. And you go down, a little bit under the ground, and it just looks like plain rock. So our universe looks like it's a lot of dead, and there's this little layer of life on our planet, which is unusual. We don't see much of it anywhere. If that was all an illusion, if almost all of it was wild and alive, then it's a question, well, why are they pretending to be dead? I mean, I would think just a weird, wild world of life would not look dead. That would be my presumption. So the fact that a lot of it looks dead makes me kind of think, well, okay, a lot of it probably is dead. Then there might be exceptions. There might be some few rare exceptions, but I'm still going to think most stuff that looks dead is dead. And there might be a few things that happen to look dead that aren't dead. And so that's the key question, and that I have given some thought in the context of UFOs. Not because I'm especially interested in or find these plausible, but because I felt I had done some work that made me an expert on that, and I felt it was my obligation to think it through. So I did this work on what I call grabby aliens a couple of years ago, and that's about where are aliens in space-time. And I have a 3-parameter model, each parameter fit to data, giving a distribution of aliens in space-time. And I'm pretty proud of that. And it seems like it answers this really important question. And so given that I'm now an expert on where are aliens in space-time and what they're doing, of course, this model of aliens in space-time has to be fit to a story of what they're doing, why they're where they are and what's going on. Then if somebody says, oh, well, these weird things people see, like UFOs, those are aliens, I go, well, some people dismiss that on the basis of saying, look, I don't care what you see. This is just so crazy unlikely that there's just no point in considering it. And that's an argument based on a prior. So in any sort of analysis of data and trying to explain it we talk about a Bayesian approach, and the idea is we split the analysis into what's called a prior and a likelihood. So the likelihood is saying, okay, if this theory was true, what sort of things would we see? How similar to what we see are the things we would see if this theory were true? So that's what a likelihood is. And the prior is, okay, but how plausible is it, ignoring the evidence, that this would be the sort of thing that would be true? And because there's this hypothesis that say UFOs are aliens, that hypothesis in a Bayesian analysis, there's two parts. There would be, okay, if they were aliens, what would they look like? Would that look much like what we see? Or if they were something else, what would that look like? That's the likelihood. But the other part is okay, but how a prior plausible at all is it that there would be aliens around? And because I did this analysis of aliens, I felt, look, I'm an expert on the prior. I should speak up to that. So again, a lot of people dismiss the whole idea that UFOs are aliens on the assumption that, or the conclusion that, it's just so crazy unlikely a priori. There's just no point in looking at the evidence. It's just crazy unlikely. And so that was the question I tried to address. How crazy unlikely is it? Is it crazy unlikely or just a bit unlikely? And and what's the most likely story that could explain, if it were true, that UFOs are aliens? That's what I'm an expert on from my analysis of aliens. So I like to make the analogy to a murder trial. When somebody's accused of murder, we listen and we say, okay, what evidence do you have? And again, that's a combination of evidence, smoking gun, whatever else it is, plus the prior. Well, how believable is it that, this person would have actually murdered somebody? And in a murder trial, the prior of any one accusation is roughly 1 in a million. That is, roughly 1 in 1,000 people get murdered, and each person had roughly 1,000 people nearby who might have done it. And so any one accusation of this guy killed that guy is roughly a 1 in a million, prior, but evidence can overcome that. That is, ordinary evidence of the sort we see in murder trials is quite capable of getting you to overcome this 1 in a million reluctance to believe it by showing you specific evidence. And so now if it was a 1 in a quadrillion or something, well, we probably wouldn't. We would just say, no, that's crazy. I don't care what you think you saw.
Yeah.
You probably just made a mistake. You were delusional something, because that's just so crazy unlikely. There's no way you could get me enough evidence to overcome my prior that's just crazy. So with UFOs, my analysis, or my conclusion is, we're talking roughly a 1 in 10,000 prior. That is, if I didn't know anything about UFO evidence and I was just supposed to look at my analysis and say, what's the chances there would be UFOs hanging around now doing roughly the sort of things that UFOs are doing, I would give it a 1 in 10,000 chance. And so, that's definitely not saying I'm sure that it's true. But it's high enough to say, well, if you think you got evidence here, we got to look at it. We can't just dismiss this on the basis of saying that's crazy. That's my main conclusion, is it's not crazy. It might be false, but it's not crazy. You got to look at the evidence.
I think that's what a lot of the 2021 disclosure for the Congress was about. It's too much going on for it not to be something. We got to talk about it a little bit.
Well, they wanted to seem serious, and I guess that is appropriate for politicians. They need to seem serious. So, yeah. But of course, they were ambiguous about what conclusions they were drawing, and trying to set on the edge of, seriously considering it, maybe not going overboard.
They got poor David Grush up there talking about biologics.
Yeah, well, obviously some people said some things that you're not sure you can believe, because you want to know, okay, what's the evidence for this? And then we weren't really shown much evidence there. But the mere fact that these people were taken seriously is some evidence. But honestly, this is what politicians do.
And it came out of nowhere.
Well, there was stuff going on behind the scenes, but yeah.
To us, we're just okay, we're in the middle. I'm not going to say pandemic again, but all of a sudden, and also aliens. What? Because I was happy. I'm like, yes. What? Okay, we'll do that.
Right. Well, so I've looked at some of the evidence. I've read a couple of books on the subject, and et cetera. So there definitely seems to be some instant, episodes, say the Nimitz aircraft carrier in 2004, where basically you go, wow, that's kind of weird.
I was going to ask you about that. You talk about the Tic
Okay.
Tac?
Yeah. So I'm not sure each way, but I say, like, you can't just easily dismiss this. Okay. Somebody's got to look at these details. Like, I'm not the expert to look at these details. So I know this isn't my job, but I can tell, look, this isn't, you can't just wave your hand and say that's a balloon or, sunlight reflecting off the water or some crap like that. I mean, come on. It's definitely more than that. What it is, I don't know. But again, I've presented myself as saying there's two different things you can specialize in here. And I can specialize in the part that I'm good at, and I can speak to that. And the other part, other people are going to have to talk about. And, obviously, if you're talking about Navy pilots and what they're seeing, then those are the kind of people who would have the evidence and know specifics of, what kind of things you might see when and how they'd look, and et cetera. And they should be speaking to that part of the analysis. I can speak to the prior.
And you can't just do the typical, oh, he's a crazy whack job when you're talking about David Fravor, because he's not. He's as legit as they come as far as
right.
As far as
it doesn't mean he's right. I mean, in principle, he could still be wrong, but you can't just wave your hand and say that's crazy.
He's crazy. The scary thing to me is, what if they're Russian or Chinese, and it's some kind of hidden technology? But
but the strange thing there, look, the technologies that would be real if these technologies are what they seem aren't just a little bit more advanced than what we have.
Yeah.
Okay? It's a lot. It's way more. And you think, look, if you were paying billions of dollars for militaries in order to defend yourself or even be, support aggression, you've got a budget and you're trying to spend it the best you can. If they had access to this sort of technology, I look at the way they spend all the other money we can see, and I go, why would you be spending your money that way? Look, you have this super spectacular tech. It's just weird. It's like, if you can make tanks and you're spending money on horses, I'm going why spend money on horses for battle? If you can make tanks, then yeah, of course you'd be making tanks. So the puzzle is, if this is Chinese or Russian, what are they doing with all the other crap they spend money on? I mean, we can see in Ukraine-Russia war, we see what the Russians are spending money on, and they're struggling with it, and we can see it looks like they're trying as hard as they can. And look, if they had technology like the Tic Tac, why wouldn't they be using it? Why would they be spending money on all this other stuff that's so much less effective?
I never thought of that particular concept before. That's kind of like building bow and arrows when you got submachine guns. Like, why do you have a bow and arrow department?
Right. So that's the problem, of course. I mean, obviously another problem is look, there's a lot of leakage. The world, no one part of the world is that much more advanced than the rest, because we all have, ability to look over the fence and see what people are doing, and, sneak over there and, hire people from there to come over here. And that's why, technology leaks all over the world, because, we are all looking to keep up with everybody, right?
That's the Chinese space shuttle. It's just like ours.
Right, exactly. So
exactly.
So that limits sort of how plausible it is that they could be vastly more advanced on any particular tech than we are, right, among the people that we know on the Earth. So somehow you'll have to explain these weird things in terms of some tech that's clever, but not that much better than what we've got. But that's a kind of a hard story to tell about stuff. It looks on the surface like, no, this is crazy better.
It looks like it's thousands of years more.
So that's the hard part of explaining this in terms of other familiar Earth organizations, is just how are you going to tell the story that this is just a bit better than what we got?
Just the only explanation I can come up with, because I do kind of hang out in maybe the circles where they would maybe talk about this a little bit more serious but maybe it's like a laser guided drone. But that's still, it's a solid object doing that.
I mean,
it's hard to think.
A better story is that people have figured out how to send particle beams or lasers that intersect and then make a glowing thing that's just a plasma that they can move around, because they just turn the direction of these lasers. And so they can make them suddenly jump or speed along, because there isn't really a thing there. There's just a glowing pile of gas that they made by projecting beams on it. That's a possibility, but the question is,
that's about it.
how much could that make sense? But I mean, we should go back to basics. Look, when we're trying to explain this stuff, we have a limited range of theories we can work with, right?
Mm-hmm.
One set of theories is just mistakes and delusions, right? It was a balloon, it was a reflection, it was the moon, it was Venus, it was, you know,
swamp gas.
Right, exactly.
Swamp gas. Piss off Jimmy Carter.
So that's one class of solutions. And I got to say, you know, that works for a lot of cases out there, but there's certainly a set of cases where that's just a really hard stretch.
Did you watch Blue Book?
I've certainly seen some things from it, but the point is there are these harder cases, and mistakes and delusions is a hard sell, but you know, it still could be true in some sense that maybe there's a way we're not really thinking about the sort of mistake or delusion you could make, and once we understand that, we'll go, oh, I guess, you know, this makes sense. But still,
right? So far with it too.
Okay. Another class of theories is, as you were just mentioning, some hidden organizations on Earth of other humans that are keeping secrets and are, you know, hiding tech that they've got that the rest of us, you know, don't know about. And then again, the question is, well, why aren't they using it for all the other expensive stuff they seem to be spending on? But okay, that's a second class of solutions. A third class of solutions is, okay, maybe they're really aliens, right? And, you know, that's what I was talking about having the prior for. Okay, we can go into that more if you want. You know, what would make sense there. But there's a fourth class of solutions we should notice and keep in mind, and that's hoaxes and lies.
Don't forget that, yeah.
You know, so if you look at, say, the U.S. government over the decades, they have sometimes lied. They've sometimes faked things, especially saying, you know, we know that in World War II, they made whole fake fleets, fake invasions, and all sorts of things to try to trick the other side into thinking a bunch of stuff was happening that wasn't happening. You know,
inflatable tanks.
Exactly. And we've even had, you know, secret CIA or whatever projects that didn't come to light till several decades afterwards. They kept the secrets for a long time, right? So, and on the prior, so we got to say the prior on that's pretty damn high. That is, they do, this happens, right?
It's almost a thing.
Right. Okay.
It's like your shtick.
So, and if you look at the evidence, you go, okay, well, how could, you know, hoaxes and lies explain this? You know, look at this cool stuff that David Fravor says he saw, and we go, says he saw. Hoaxes and lies, says he saw. Well, I mean, how are we sure that he's not lying, right? That's where you got to go when you're thinking of hoaxes, lies. You're trying to think of all these people you would usually trust, and asking, yeah, but what if it was a lie? And so I do think you got to go there mentally and try to think about all of these famous events and go, well, let's say, you know, look at the custody of evidence here. Like, who was holding this evidence when, and who could have messed with it when? Who are you believing exactly? So I don't mean to imply that's a case shut, we're done, and explains it. I just mean, look, you got to be looking at this family of explanations.
It's got to be a factor. And I think what helps him out is the gimbal footage that came out a couple of years later that actually had pictures of what he saw, even though it was in the IR spectrum.
Sure. But, you know, people can fake with pictures too.
Oh, you telling me? Fake pictures, what?
Yeah, so that's why you gotta, like, be careful. But honestly, like, the most disturbing thing I think is, like, if I believe that, say, the U.S. federal government faked a lot of UFO reports, a lot of them, not just a few, because, like, we actually know they actually faked a few because you know, there were these prototypes of, you know, spy planes they were working on, and they basically lied to people to convince them those were UFOs in order to, you know, hide the fact that they had these spy planes and didn't want people to see about them. So we know the federal government has actually lied about UFOs before. But if there was a program to lie about a lot more, that is, you know, most of the most famous reports were some sort of a lie, if they'd be willing to do that and they did that, well, hats off to them. It's a pretty well executed arrangement, I gotta say. You know, good job, guys. But I also gotta say, okay, the moon landing, you know, some people say that was faked. And I'm gonna go, well, if you faked the UFOs, maybe you faked the moon landings too, right? I'm gonna worry more about that, right?
Yeah, that's such a sore subject to it. Not sore subject. I'm torn because I love a good conspiracy theory. I just love it. But I'm also in Huntsville, Alabama, and
Right?
moon landing
Yeah.
is our mascot. It's,
Right. Anyway, right, sure. But anyway, that's where you got to go.
yeah, I
Well,
love it.
but I mean, the point here was just to list these other categories of
Mhm.
explanations that we really have to take seriously, right? But then the last one, perhaps the most interesting one, is the aliens one. And you might wonder, well, okay, my job is to say what the number is, like how plausible is it that aliens would be here now doing the weird things they're doing, and then to come up with the best story of what that could be. How could that make sense? So I summarize the key things to explain as two key things. So again, the hypothesis is, okay, some UFOs are aliens. And I need to come up with a story that makes sense of that in the light of some things that seem kind of not to make sense.
Mhm.
Here's the two things that don't make sense. One is, okay, they're here right now, but if we look nearby stars, the rest of the galaxy, the rest of the solar system, we don't see much there.
Nope.
So they're not doing that much there. And we're pretty sure that if there were in fact aliens out there that had an origin independent of ours, they would have arisen, say, tens and hundreds of millions of years before us.
Mhm.
That is, the universe is 14 billion years old. So the odds that they would have arisen in the same 10,000 years as us is really small. So just, in terms of just independent origins, either they're before us or we're before them. If we're before them, of course, they're not here now. But if they were here before us, they could have been here a long time ago, tens or hundreds of millions of years ago. That, I think we're pretty sure of that. So that means in those tens or hundreds of millions of years, they could have done a lot of other things besides coming here. They could have colonized the galaxy. Even in 1 million years, you could easily colonize the whole galaxy and change everything. Because a million years is a really long time. A billion years is an even longer time. So the important thing is, the universe is really old compared to our civilization. Our civilization may be a few thousand years old, and the universe is 14 billion years ago. So you have to take those time differences into account when you're thinking about aliens. You got to go, they got to be really old. And that meant they could have gone out there and just changed the universe near us completely. But by assumption, they didn't. So that's one thing to explain. Well, how is it that they did not change everything we see around us, but did come here now? It's kind of weird, right? Because if they just went everywhere like they came here, then we would just see a lot more stuff. Okay, that's puzzle number one. Why are they here now, but not anywhere else we can see? Puzzle number two is, when they're here, because they're, tens, hundreds of million years more advanced than us, we know they could have done one of two things that would be the obvious things to do. One, they could have made themselves completely obvious. Obviously, they know where we're concentrated. If they wanted to be visible, they could definitely do it. They could show up in Times Square, in front of the White House, whatever. They could just be really obvious. There's no question that if they had wanted to, they could be really obvious, right? The other thing is, say they just wanted to watch us and not be noticed. They could do that easy. They could just have, a black sphere orbiting the planet with, fantastically powerful telescopes. We'd never see it. They could make it so damn black, so damn silent, we would just never notice it, right? That's also within their capabilities. So they could either be completely obvious or completely invisible. Those are, I think, pretty obvious conclusions from the fact that they're way, way more advanced than us. My scenario that makes sense of this starts with panspermia.
Life
Didn't start on Earth, it came from somewhere else. Okay? That's the idea of panspermia. And plausibly, it started right at the beginning of our solar system and our planet's history, when our star was in a stellar nursery of plausibly thousands of other stars, all in a big, what's called a molecular cloud. And all these stars were started at the same time because the cloud collapsed and all these stars formed, and then all the planets formed. And all of these stars were very close to each other. The planets were close to each other. There were lots of rocks going back and forth. So if life from elsewhere had seeded that nursery, it would have seeded not just our star, but most of the other stars too. Because again, we're all really close, rocks flying back and forth all the time. So panspermia, if it had seeded life on Earth, because life does seem to have started on Earth very early, so plausibly it started right from the beginning, then it would have seeded not just our star, but the other stars in our nursery, roughly 1,000 or even 10,000 stars. After that formation with a few million years, those stars drifted apart from each other and eventually spread out into a ring around the galaxy at our radius from the center. And right now, there are 1,000 or so other stars out there that are our stellar siblings. And we can actually see them with telescopes by seeing they have the same spectra as our sun in terms of the mixes of elements because they were coming from the same cloud. So there are siblings for our star out there right now in the galaxy. And if life had been seeded on our star, around our star at the very beginning, it would have plausibly seeded those other stars too. So they would also be siblings on the path of life.
Cool.
So then, plausibly, they also were evolving over the last 4 billion years, and they went through different stages, and then finally, one of them at least got to our level now before us. They're panspermia siblings. So that would be a story about. So this explains one key thing. Basically, our grabby aliens analysis of aliens says that advanced aliens like us appear roughly once per million galaxies. Really rare.
Really?
So the key question is, well, how is it there could be any aliens near us? If on average they show up once per million galaxies, it's really unlikely that they would be even in the same galaxy as us, much less close to us. So panspermia siblings explains why the rest of the universe that we can see could be really empty, but there are aliens right near us. Why? Because there are siblings. They came from the same origin. So that explains part of why most of the universe around us looks empty, even though they and we are here. But that's not quite enough because, again, if they showed up in the last 10 million years or 100 million years, they could have easily filled up our galaxy, if not a lot more. So we have to postulate that for some reason they chose not to. They might be environmentalism, maybe religion, maybe the fact that they didn't want to have their cultures fragment across many different star systems. For some reason, they did not want to expand out from their home system very far. And they had a rule against it. See, the only way that they could prevent expansion would be to make sure no part of them expanded, right? If they're a big solar system with lots of parts, if any one part left and went off to try to make a colony, then well, that's the end of it. The whole thing's expanding. So in order to have a system that doesn't expand, they kind of have to make a rule and enforce it that says nobody gets to leave. But maybe they did that. So that's another assumption here is first we assume panspermia siblings, then we assume the siblings that are showed up before us, they made a rule for some reason, no expansion. Now, from their point of view, they know they have siblings, and they know that any one of these siblings could break the rule. If any of their siblings got to their level and started to expand, well, this whole no expansion thing's over, right? So that would give them a reason to come here, to make an exception to their own expansion, right? So basically, if they just allow everybody to leave and go off and do stuff, that's going to be really hard to prevent them from colonizing and spreading. So they're basically not going to let anybody leave from home very often. So exceptions got to be rare. But if they're here now, they made an exception for us. Like, okay, that trip's allowed. Usually nobody's allowed to leave, but this one, okay, we'll say this trip is allowed. Why would they make an exception for us? Well, we're at risk of breaking the rule. If we continue to develop in a natural way, we may well not adopt the rule they adopted. We may well decide to expand. And if we do, their rule is done. Expansion happens, right? And pretty fast. In 1 million years, we could colonize the galaxy, right?
Oh, yeah.
And say, they may have been around for 100 million years. So they've known for a long time this was a risk. They've been watching their siblings because that's easy to do from home. and they could see which of them looked like they might be at risk of developing advanced life, and they could make sure they send exceptional, probes, expeditions out to those few places that are at risk of breaking the rule. And then that's a reason why they're here right now, but not everywhere else we can see. So I've made some, in order to explain these weird facts, I've made some assumptions. One, panspermia sibling. Second, they have the rule against expansion. But that by itself predicts that they would be here now. And why would they be here? What do you say?
Stop us from expanding.
Exactly. Right. So now
I was listening. I didn't know there was a question and answer session.
Exactly. Well, I'm a professor. I got to ask.
I know. I'm okay. I'm listening so intently.
Okay. So now we also know that they had an easy solution. They could have just destroyed us.
Oh yeah.
They didn't even have to, come here. They could have just sent a missile bomb, whatever, destroy us. That would have solved their problem, right? So we also can see they didn't do that. So another assumption we have to add into the mix is they feel a little affiliation with us, a little compassion, a little connection. They don't want to just kill us. They might be willing to do so, if we push them at it. So we need to be careful about pushing them too far. But their first choice is not to just kill us, right? Okay. Obviously. So now they made an exception from their usual thing. They sent an expedition here for the purpose of getting us not to expand. They decided they don't want to just kill us, so they want to instead convince us not to expand. Okay, that would be the clean, peaceful thing to do. And whatever this expedition was, they have to worry about it breaking the rules too, right? The reason why they didn't want to let many people leave from home is that any one expedition that left from home, it could start a whole bunch more expeditions and break the whole thing, right? Anyone leaving from home is a big risk of the whole thing breaking down. So whatever they sent here had to be sent with a pretty simple strategy, given the equipment and authorization to implement that strategy, but it's not given a full authorization to invent its own solutions. They're not going to give it that much freedom and discretion, okay? Because that would risk the whole thing going wrong, right? So they lock down this thing, maybe send along political officers to make sure that they, obey the home's command, but they send them here with some strategy to convince us not to expand. So now the question is, what could that strategy be? What could their strategy be to convince us not to expand? It needs to be a simple thing, easy to execute with whoever they send here. And then they have a plan A that they're hoping we'll go with, a plan A somehow to convince us not to expand, because for some reason, that's what they want. They don't want expansion. Okay, so now ask, well, how could they convince us? Okay, so now I have the next key assumption is that they are also a social species like we do. We are. Most social species on Earth, at least among mammals, have status hierarchies. That is, some animals are higher status than others. And this is, in fact, how humans domesticate other animals and ourselves. How do we domesticate horses and dogs, etc.? Well, we just slot in at the top of their status hierarchy. We say, we're the top horse, we're the top dog, and, you should do what we say. And so a standard strategy we use to get other animals to do what we want is to find their status hierarchy and slot in at the top of their status hierarchy. And how do you do that? You just be stronger, more impressive, more whatever it is that counts for status among those animals, and then you get to be at the top. And that's what humans do to each other when we domesticate each other. When humans went and conquered some new area, what did they do to get the locals to accept the new lords? Well, they built a palace, and they had finery of clothing, and they had impressive horses and soldiers, whatever. You impress them that you're the top dog, you're at the top of the hierarchy, and then they'll accept it. Okay, so this looks pretty universal across social species on Earth. So the assumption is, well, what if it's universal across the universe? They also came from a social species. They also had a status hierarchy. They also domesticated other animals by slipping at the top of their status hierarchy, right? So that would suggest the obvious solution How do they get us to do what they want? Well, they domesticate us. How do they do that? Well, they come in and they slot into the top of our status hierarchy. Okay, but how do they do that? Well, we're impressed by stuff. So they have to come and do the stuff we're impressed by, except better than us, and then not be too hostile and too, mean, in order to convince us that, hey, they're the top dogs and we should do what they want. And that's the scenario. So to do that, first of all, they can't be completely invisible. That won't work. We're not going to be impressed if they're not completely invisible. Okay, right? So on the other hand, they could have been completely visible. So why didn't they do that? We say, well, look, we're going to accept them as the top dog unless we're really repulsed by them. If they're like spiders and we just hate spiders, it might just be hard to accept them and do what they want because, ew, spiders, right? So look, they knew that they didn't know that much about exactly what we were like because they had to make these strategies from a long way off. And so they need to find a way to impress us, but they're pretty confident, and that's probably true, that if they revealed everything about themselves, we would find something about them we hate. Maybe they eat babies, who knows? Maybe they eat snot. I don't know what it is. They don't know what it is. But if they just showed up on the White House lawn and allowed us to go into their ship and told us everything about their history and their habits, we'd find something we hated because we're just look how we find we hate other people on Earth, right?
And we'll say it works in the same in cultures. You find other cultures that have something. So
right. So we're not actually that very forgiving to other cultures on Earth, right? We find one little thing and we're willing to hate them for it, right? And so they figured that's probably going to happen to them if they showed lots of details about themselves. So they decided, okay, they can't show lots of details and they can't be completely invisible. So the answer is to hang out at the edge. Just show us what they need to impress us, to domesticate us, but don't show too much else. Of course, we would have to know what their agenda is, what they want from us. And so the question is, well, why aren't they just telling us that? Why don't they just tell us, hey, we're here and we don't want you to expand? Well, the story would be they thought through and they said, you guys are smart. You'll figure it out. Because they know that we can walk through the analysis I've just walked you through. They don't have to tell us. We can figure out, oh, why are you here? I guess looks like you didn't expand. You're here as an exception. I guess you don't want us to expand. And often, in fact, people who have said they've encountered UFOs and said, I'm getting a feeling from this is what they want, they've said this. They've said they don't want us to expand. They don't want us to mess with nature, blah, blah, blah. That's a thing people have said. I don't know if that's because the aliens were doing something special or just, this is what people made up. But the point is, it's not a crazy thing to think.
No.
It comes to mind as a thing, as a reason they could be here, as an agenda they could have. And when you do the analysis, you go, yeah, well, that would make sense. So now, to explain the two key facts, they're here, but not all the other places we could see, even though they're much older than us, and they're hanging out at the edge, but not invisible, not really visible. To explain those, we postulate they're panspermia siblings. They have a rule against expansion, and they've guessed correctly that we have status hierarchies. We can be domesticated by slotting at the top of our status hierarchy. So that's what they're going to do. They're going to come here and be impressive, not do anything useful, but just show us that they are just more impressive than us. And then that's the story. So when I estimate sort of what's the chance of each of these things, that's where I get the 10,000. Saying, okay, panspermia siblings could be 1 in 10, 1 in 100. Them having a rule against expansion, like maybe 1 in 10. Them guessing that we have status hierarchies, maybe even 1 in 2. Okay, we're there. We've got a 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000 prior story about why they're here, what they're doing. And again, that doesn't mean it's true. That's the prior. And then you have to look at the evidence, like in the Nimitz or whatever, and say, okay, but what's our best theory of what this actual evidence is? And is it best explained by this theory?
It's supported pretty well with the fact that they started increasing their sightings after the nukes went off back in the 40s. Kind of like, oh gosh, these monkeys are getting close.
Maybe then they figure now it's time that we might listen.
We better do something. They're going to
destroy themselves. One of the points is, okay, by this theory, they could have been around for, hundreds of thousands of years.
It's kind of dormant.
Well, they might have been doing impressive things, but not that we would notice. So in some way, we can't really be impressed unless we sort of get that they're actually there and that they're actually doing something, right? If it's just some weird, flashy thing in nature that, nature's full of weird things, you really can't be that impressed. You're only going to be impressed and treat them as a, high status member of your, uh, your group if you see them as actually agents who are purposely doing something and actually have these capacities, and then that'll take some while for us to even see them that way.
They're just punching air thinking, is the pyramid's not good enough for you? It means nothing. Yeah, and for all we know, what they did is something we haven't even found yet. Like it could be like
They could have done other more impressive things, sure,
yeah.
than just hang out at the edge of our visibility, but that's at least the thing we're kind of noticing now.
Yeah. There's a creepy pasta that's funny about the Oumuamua, the rock that came through interstellarly a few years ago.
Oh, right, yeah.
There's a creepy pasta that was an alien probe and they were scouting us, but
right. I mean, but
probably a rock.
the point would be to be more. We can't really tell. Okay, was that an alien probe? Was it just a rock?
Yeah, it's a rock.
So the point of this story is they got to do stuff that's kind of makes it clear enough, at least averaging over cases. Oh, there's really someone there, and they're really doing something.
And put their brand on it.
Yeah, just so we know. And it does look like UFOs are more like that. There's lots of sightings. They do pretty similar things. And they're pretty peaceful. They don't threaten us mostly, unless we attack them. And they're definitely there, and they're definitely really capable. And at least if the usual stories can be believed, they're there, they're capable, and they're just showing off. Basically, look what we can do. And
I mean,
it was really true. They really are impressive. I mean, honestly,
yeah. I mean,
go say, yep, you win.
Yes, if they're there doing it, it's definitely ball game for us. We can't stop it. We're going to nuke them. We're going to shoot them with a gun. It's not going to.
Right. Well, of course,
bounce off.
This is often happens when you try to domesticate an animal like a dog or a horse or something else. Well, first they're going to try to fight you to see if you deserve.
You a little bit.
Yeah, they're going to say, well, you say you're the top dog, but you need to prove it to me. But they're going to take you on and try to fight you a bit, and then the top dog has to put them down gently but firmly and say, I really am the top dog. I really am stronger than you. And I'm just, you made me show it. Fine, I'm going to show it. I mean, kids do this to their parents all the time, right? Kids are constantly challenging their parents' authority and strength and forcing the parents to prove that they, really are the parents and they really can make you go to bed.
Yes, they are. They're doing it right now outside my door. That's why I have to keep muting. Because. So would you consider this, kind of like you described the galactic law, don't expand? It's
only a law of this one
Yeah.
culture, but if they make sure nobody else is around,
Mhm.
yeah, it's the law for whoever they can impose it on.
I mean, but that would be part of the kind of like a factor in the Great Filter that you're so well known for.
Well, it would definitely help explain why everything is so empty around here. Yeah, so we should just maybe review the Grabby Aliens model. The Grabby Aliens model, as I said, has 3 parameters, each fit to data. And the simple story is, advanced civilizations appear at random places in space, near stars, say, and they appear at a random point in time, which is a power law of time because they have to go through a sequence of hard steps like we did on Earth. So life on Earth had to go through some hard steps, and we had a deadline before life on Earth wasn't possible, before we get to our stage, and then that has to happen elsewhere. And then once we reach the level we're at, then the next thing that happens in the model is they just expand as fast as they can. And that's the end of it. They just keep expanding until they meet other ones who are expanding, and then that's the end of the model. So the simple story there of Grabby Aliens is once they appear and start expanding, that's just it. That's all they do. They expand. And the idea is that whatever they touch, they change in some visible way. So there are these spheres in the universe expanding, and if you could be from the right vantage to see them, you would see them as different. That sphere is full of aliens who've changed the volume to do whatever they want to do, and it looks different from stuff they haven't got to yet. So that's the idea of the Grabby Aliens model. So yes, that model predicts that they're a really long way away, and it'll be, say, 1 billion years till we meet them, if we go out to meet them. And so they're really rare, and that's fine, except, UFOs don't make much sense there, right? You just take that model by itself, you say, well, UFOs couldn't possibly be here because the nearest one is, 1 million galaxies away.
I actually saw the model you're talking about, the 3D graphic with the circles,
Right?
spheres
Yep.
expanding together. That's it has to do with the panspermia as well, like you were saying earlier.
Well,
But
actually, so that
yeah,
version of the model doesn't include any panspermia. So that just
oh,
has
oh,
independent origins. Things just appear at random, independent places. They grow and then they meet. Panspermia then is a change of that model. It says, oh no, they could appear together in a correlated way because a star system might get seeded with many stars in the same birth, place where stars are born, the same nursery,
mhm.
and then a bunch of places that
Oh yeah,
life would
okay.
appear would all appear in a clump near each other.
It's almost like a an alien fairy ring. Just they grow right in
Yeah.
one spot and they expand this way. What do you think what was the minimum humans would have to do to become a grabby alien species? Like if we started like mining the moon for H3, would that make us grabby aliens or would
No, the key thing would be able to send out a probe to another star
mhm.
that could reproduce itself and then send out more probes.
Oh, that's a big one.
So
Another
so
star is a biggie.
what right. So if you could send out probes to other asteroids in the solar system and they could reproduce, well, you could get to the rest of the solar system. You could fill the solar system that way, but
Mhm.
very hard to get to the next star that way. There's the really long deserts between stars, and so you
It's
really will need the ability to cross those deserts to get to the other side and then reproduce there.
it's such a wide space is so big. Like we can't. I tried to fathom it just from like thinking about it. It's
Absolutely
impossible.
huge, right? Well, yeah. So I think you have to realize it takes what, like 8 minutes or 8 seconds for
8 minutes.
light, 8 minutes for light to get from the sun to here. And then you're thinking about, light years away. So the difference
Yeah.
between minutes and years is the difference between how close the sun is and how far away these things are. And the sun is really far away.
And Alpha Centauri and Vega and just how
Right.
far away that take 26,000 years.
To get
And
across the other side of Earth takes a fraction of a second for light.
mhm,
So the distance to the sun is 8 minutes compared to the fraction of a second to get around the Earth. So the sun is way far away compared to the other side of the Earth. And then these
mhm.
stars are way far away compared to the sun. So it's a really long way, but still in the next 10,000 years, we'll probably be able to do this, make a probe that goes to another star and reproduces.
Yeah, that was one of the and it may be in your book. I can't even remember now, but making a computer program that you send to another star and it gathers the elements from there and creates your things from what's available at that destination
Right now, life on
and the
Earth,
data.
little bacteria on Earth, they're able to float in the atmosphere, land somewhere, and
Mhm,
grow and reproduce. That's a thing bacteria can do. So they're really tiny, right? So it doesn't
mhm.
necessarily take a lot of stuff. It takes the right sort of stuff in the right arrangement. But now we're going to have to, instead of just floating in the atmosphere, landing on some dirt somewhere, they have to go all the way to another star. So yeah, it's going to be a lot harder to get to another star. But then once they land, they have to reproduce. They have to grow. They have to take materials and mine it and get
Yeah.
energy and collect it and manufacture things and then make versions of themselves. But
Like
that's what life does. So clearly, it's possible.
I mean, that's basically what reproducing is.
Right.
The kind of like a 3D printer, just taking the elements you have available and just making what.
Right. But humans haven't yet mastered that very well in the sense
Yep.
that we can make a lot of stuff in the economy. And in the sense, the entire world economy reproduces, but small fraction of the world, they don't do so much reproduction because they tend to depend on the rest of the world in
Kind
terms
of
of
like
the human
America, kind
economy.
of like America right now, and we
Yeah,
just kind
we,
of
we
consume.
where we can't just reproduce everything in America. America definitely relies on other parts of the world to
Yeah.
make stuff.
So in your opinion, this is kind of a shifting gears, but other than nuclear destruction or this intergalactic law, what are other great filters that you've thought of or hypothesized
Well, this
outside of nuclear
this
weapons?
scenario I described for the aliens is kind of one.
Yeah, that's a big one.
That is, what if we have a world government and for whatever reason it decides to prevent further growth? It might have all sorts of reasons to want to do that. Again, environmentalism, religion, the threat of competition. It would just decide, look, this is big enough. We don't want to get any bigger. That would mess with stuff. So let's just stay this size and prevent anyone in our scope of control from growing bigger. That would literally stop growth.
Yeah, and be
And
a really great filter.
that's a risk. So if we it's worse actually than big destruction. If we had like a nuclear war or something, and there's only, I don't know, another, million people left on Earth and scattered around, well, they would quickly start growing again, and within 10,000 years, we'd be back where we are. But a totalitarian government that decides to stop growth, well, the question is, how long can it last? Because it's not like any one part of the world can say, well, I just want to secede from the world and we'll just grow separately. It's going to say, no, you can't. You'll be a threat. If you let you grow very big, you're going to be a threat to us. So we're just going to, nip you in the bud.
I mean, that's North Korea.
If it could.
In a nutshell, yeah.
If it could, North Korea would prevent anybody from competing with them.
They would love to secede from the world.
So that's another great filter, is the rise of a long-lasting totalitarian government. Now, the government does have to be competent enough. If it's really incompetent government, it'll just collapse and fall in a pile of rubble, and then other stuff will replace it and take over, right? So it has to be able to actually maintain control and last a long time, which is a big ask. But eventually we might have things like that.
And you already stated it that a nuclear holocaust would still leave people to grow back eventually.
Right. And even a big disease would. I mean, having even a pandemic that kills everyone is kind of a big ask, because there's just a lot of people, some of whom are isolated. But
they would be immune.
We're actually pretty hard to squash right now. Obviously, if you had like a supernova nearby or some big, huge asteroid hits the Earth, well, that could do it. Although even a huge asteroid, well, as long as we have some people buried deep below the Earth who don't come out for a few years later, they can escape the asteroid. So killing off everyone on Earth is actually quite a challenge.
It'd be a tough one. What was that movie that just came out? Don't Look Up.
Right.
Meryl Streep. that was a good one.
Yeah, there was something coming in the sky that way, but again, they weren't thinking that much about what if you just dug really deep and took lots of stuff down there and waited for 10 years or 100 years even. There's been a lot of science fiction stories about people who dug down under the ground and just waited a long time for something on the surface to be over.
Look at Fallout, just came out. That's the whole show.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the Yellowstone eruption, or the geothermal eruption they had earlier in the week. I was like, oh man, is this happening? Now you had mentioned that people underestimate the evolution of ocean worlds. Like,
right.
What do you think's in our oceans? In that same vein, like, what do you think is in our oceans that we don't see because it's like miles deep?
I mean, it's not crazy that life could have evolved deep in the ocean and become advanced, but at some point you would think they would spread out. So just like we on the surface are now spreading into the ocean, things in the ocean would spread out to the surface. So the question is just, for example, in the next 1,000 years, certainly 10,000 years, we will now be all over the ocean. Our descendants will definitely colonize the ocean, right? They will go to the deepest parts and do whatever the hell they want down there.
It's free real estate.
Right, exactly.
They're going.
So if something's nearly as advanced as us, then it would also, colonize the land in a few thousand years if it starts in the ocean. So that suggests that in order for something under the ocean to be near our level of advancements, it's this remarkable coincidence of development where it's just at the right level we are, just before we're going to go down there, they would come up here. That's kind of a unlikely coincidence. So now, if for some reason they had this policy of being under the ocean and wanting to hide there, then maybe. So that's like my postulate for the aliens, right?
Yeah.
The postulate for the aliens that for some reason they have a policy against expansion. So we could imagine some deep sea civilization that has a policy against expansion onto the surface or even out from the rest of the ocean. Then they might plausibly be down there but not come up here very fast, right? So then they could have been down there a long time. But now, the question is, how plausible is that? Because if they're relatively advanced, they might still have a lot of pollution, energy generation, thermal signatures, all sorts of other ways they might be visible. And of course, we still might wonder what's the chances that they would have appeared down there. So, again, it's about like the independent origin thing. For panspermia siblings, they're just on a whole separate star system. They're on this trajectory that took billions of years and just happened to get us, before us. if something under the ocean, it would have had to have a common origin with us, but just be really separate for a really long time. And then they would have achieved our level, I don't know, 10 million years ago, and then decided for some reason not to expand up to the surface, not to leave the bottom of the ocean. They had to make a rule against that, I guess. But then, of course, they might think, oh, I wonder if something on the surface will violate our rule. And then come up here to enforce the rule.
When you would think in that particular scenario, there'd be some kind of signature of an advanced civilization somewhere. Radio waves or electromagnetic.
Or neutrinos or something. Now,
yeah, something.
I'm not going to rule it out, but I just would say, it's a bit unlikely, but okay, could be true. Like, it's not crazy, but still, it's unlikely, right?
And when you spin a globe around and see that back part where Point Nemo is, and just all blue, man, what is over there?
But we have gone to the bottom of the ocean in many places, so it's not if they were spread across the entire bottom of the ocean, we definitely would have seen them by now. So they have to be only on a small set of sections down there, right? A set of sections where we just haven't looked there, and somehow we haven't seen side effects, like they're not sending bubbles of air up to the surface, or the leaking chemicals that cause the chemicals, etc. Right? There's just so the scenario you have to paint to make sense of this gets more and more limited the more of these details you think about, but it's still not impossible.
Yeah, there's also the pressure situation. You go so far down to hide from us, you're also dealing with some logistics that you may not even be the same vein of life form at that point. Just rocks.
Right. Although, if they've got, if they had an advanced civilization with limited technology, but they say have 10 million years to slowly work out, well, I think they could eventually figure stuff out.
They'd figure it. Yeah.
So you asked about ocean worlds. So basically, planets like our planet are actually pretty rare compared to planets where the entire planet is covered with the deep ocean. That's pretty common out there, actually. And so when people talk about, so in our analysis, we say we're really, really early compared to when you would expect life to appear. If there was just life on a random place and it would just sit there for as long as it took to appear, and it was all alone and nobody else would bother it, it would most likely appear near the end of the lifetime of the planet. And for most planets, that's trillions of years. So we're way early compared to when things would show up. And our explanation for that we suggest is that, in fact, there's a deadline soon. Things like us are filling the universe, and pretty soon it's going to be full, and then you can't show up trillions of years in the future. Now, to counter this argument, some people have said, oh, well, you're assuming that these other planets that last for trillions of years, that life is possible there. And they say, well, let's look at some differences between them and our planet. And there are some differences. So our star is unusually large. That's why it has an unusually short lifetime. Most of these stars out there are smaller than ours. They will live a lot longer than ours. And that's why they'll last for trillions of years. And small stars have some differences from big stars. I mean, obviously, one of them is just big stars have more light.
Yeah.
But that's not so much of an issue, because you can just have a planet closer to a smaller star, and it's basically in the same sort of habitable zone we are, farther away from our big star. So that's not an issue. But other issues are small stars, the planets around them, they tend to have bigger flares at the stars, which kind of fry the planets every once in a while, and maybe knock off the atmosphere from the planets. They don't have as much continental drift, or continental drift doesn't last as long on them. And they can get tidal locking, where one side faces the star and the other side faces away. And so one side gets really hot, the other gets really cold. And people have said that's why we're on this, star that's really big, even if it's unusual, is because small stars, they just can't support life. So all these arguments against small stars, they apply basically to planets like ours with just a small, thin ocean and lots of land. If you have a huge ocean that's deep, well, flares aren't a problem. Continental drift isn't a problem, and neither is tidal locking. None of those are problems if you're just a huge ocean planet. So then life could have arisen on one of these large ocean planets around one of these small stars. And then the last argument people have is, oh, well, if it's a big star with an ocean, how are they going to get off? Like, part of the reason we can get off our planet relatively easy is it's not so big, so the gravity is not so strong. And we make fire on land, which is hard to make fire in the ocean. And, you can launch off of land easier than you can launch out of the ocean. So that's why, they want to write off the ocean planets and say, no, advanced lives couldn't appear in the oceans. But I got to notice, look, the time duration between which we had pretty advanced technology here and got off the planet is a really short time compared to cosmological times. It's a tiny time. So look, maybe on ocean worlds, it takes them a lot longer. But, if it's a factor of 100 longer than us, that means instead of, 1,000 years, it takes them 100,000 years. That's still a tiny period of time. Okay. So I think any advanced life that could become really intelligent, advanced, and technological under an ocean, they would have plenty of time to figure out how to get off.
I bet they'd be really advanced too, because you had to overcome all those obstacles. So their stuff would be super, super advanced.
So anyway, I think that ocean worlds are perfectly reasonable candidates. And so I got to think we happen to be on this bigger star, and that's just a coincidence. It's not that all life has to appear around big stars. Life could also appear on small stars, and life doesn't have to appear on land. It could appear in the oceans. And even advanced life like us doesn't have to appear on land. Those would be my guesses about, but there's a lot we don't know.
Yeah, most of it anyway. I think an ocean world would be pretty cool. You show up and there's nothing there. All of a sudden, this like ships come out to greet you or attack you.
Well, in some sense, it's like the atmosphere. You could show up at the top of the Earth's atmosphere and just not bother to look under the atmosphere and see what's down on the ground, because you think, who cares about what's under gas? But, that's how you would look at an ocean world. You say, look, everything's down in the water. You kind of go in the water if you want to see stuff. Then you just go down there and see what you can find.
Oh, yeah. I didn't even think about that like that, because the Earth is kind of like the atmosphere would be like a gas giant.
Right.
Wouldn't think anything about it. And it burns when you go through it.
Right. You got to be careful going through this atmosphere. You're coming in from elsewhere.
Well, I can try to we'll wrap it up here pretty soon. I was wanting to ask you, have you ever heard of the gateway process from the CIA?
Gateway process.
I pulled it up.
It doesn't sound familiar.
Analysis and assessment of gateway process. Basically, the CIA released some documents in 2003 that were about the universe is a hologram, and thoughts could become a particle. And it's really wild.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like something the CIA is actually using, right? So this sounds like maybe this is a honeypot, maybe to attract other people to get tempted by whatever it is.
Yeah, I was gonna follow it up, just kind of because I read it a few weeks ago. I was like, it's kind of crazy, but your elephant in the brain is kind of like a parallel with the you described it as being the press secretary of your behavior, not the president.
Right. So I have this other book called The Elephant in the Brain about how you're wrong about your motives a lot. And that's pretty disturbing, because you tend to think that you know what you're doing and why. And to realize that you don't know why you're doing what you're doing is just pretty scary.
It really is.
That's the point here, that you are in fact wrong about what you're doing. Now, what you're doing actually makes sense. So the idea is evolution made you to do some things, and they all make sense, but it also made you to not know what you're doing and to deny it. That is, the president's press secretary doesn't know what the president's really doing, and that helps them spin a good story about it. The president's actually doing something that's sensible, at least from their point of view, but it's often in the interest of the president and the press secretary not to tell the press secretary why they're really doing things, because then they can make up a better reason. So that's your subconscious is making good choices, at least sensible choices for you, but it's not letting you know the real reasons and allowing you to be wrong about the real reasons. And that's something like it's a conspiracy theory of your mind, really. So if
it really is. That's basically what I was asking about that document, but I was going to say, on the same vein, how you feel about the manifestation process that some people preach, that you can think about something hard enough with your subconscious and it eventually comes to fruition. Just like, I don't mean to get too woo-woo. I just wanted to ask.
So I started out relatively religious. My parents were very religious. They were pastor and missionaries, and my siblings have been religious. And then in college, I learned physics. And physics seemed to me a pretty thorough view of the world that just made a lot of sense of everything. It makes sense of chemistry and biology and geology and lots of engineering. Physics is this, even computer science. It all makes sense. And so I became more basically not religious, because there wasn't a place in this physics worldview for other sorts of weird stuff people wanted to believe in. And that's still roughly where I am. I'm basically believe in physics. So we could be wrong about physics, of course, but there's a lot of things we do know about physics, and I'm pretty reluctant to go very far away from the physics we know to postulate weird stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But, the UFO stuff I talked to you about today is completely consistent with ordinary physics. There's nothing about physics that's
the best part about it, honestly.
in contradiction with what I was just describing. The age of M is completely consistent with physics, and so is all the things I will tell you about gravity aliens and about even UFOs, if UFOs are aliens. So if you start to talk to me about woo stuff where I go, well, could that be consistent with physics? And as soon as I start to suspect, no, that doesn't look very consistent with physics, I'm just going to go, well, you're going to have to offer me a lot stronger evidence to convince me of that, because I am pretty convinced of physics.
Well, I believe you. I mean, I don't doubt it a bit. I mean, it kind of goes along, almost runs into the simulation theory as well when you start to get into that kind of thing.
Right. So the simulation theory basically tells you that, sure, everything looks like it's consistent with physics. That's because everybody's setting it up just to make it look that way. But really underlying it's a completely different thing. So that's a conspiracy theory of the reality. Simulation theory says the reality around you is a conspiracy to make you think that it's the physics it looks like. But in fact, it's not really that thing.
It's like a 7 hours more longer conversation that we don't have.
Right. So that's I've done some work on that in the past, but I think on that it's just not true, but it's possibly true. That is, I don't think you should decide it's surely not true. I think you should give it a modest probability, but basically probably not true.
That's the best way I've ever heard it described. So I let my mind wander. It's kind of like a fun thing to do, is go think about that stuff. But that's why I have people like you on.
Right. Well,
telling you earlier.
Look, the only way to figure out whether something's probably not true is to ask yourself, well, what if it were true, and work your way through that. So you definitely need this ability to entertain unusual assumptions in order to analyze them to decide if they're true. So I definitely
100%.
have thought through the simulation hypothesis to try to figure out, okay, what would it imply, and what observations do we have that would be in conflict with it or consistent with it. That's the only way you can actually figure out, well, is it true? And same for UFOs, right? If you say, are those UFOs aliens? How am I supposed to know unless I say, okay, let's assume they were aliens. Let's try to think through how that would work. And then at the end of the day, you say, okay, here's the best story I came up with how UFOs could be aliens. And now I got to say, let's compare that to our best other theories and try to do a judgment. What's the best one we got? But there's no way you can really compare theories unless for each one you're willing to basically to inhabit it, to basically try to see the world from the point of view of that theory for a while and ask yourself, okay, what does it say? What does it predict?
So where do you stand on the parallel universe theory? Is that anywhere in physics?
Well, there's definitely people who think the universe has more dimensions than we think it does. Yeah. And then in that sense, in those higher dimensions, what we see is just kind of a plane. And then the question is, are there planes that are sitting nearby where there's a few rare connections between them? That's what a parallel universe would be. It would be another plane near our plane, but somehow connected to it. And, there are physicists who try to work that through, and they've tried to come up with observations that might be consistent with it. But as far as I can see, there's no particular reason to believe it. It's just a possibility that we should be watching out for.
100%. I agree. The wildest little, I say wild, but the experiment I've seen is how when they do the particle that doesn't respond until you acknowledge it. Like
I haven't heard of a particle like that.
It's a photon. I don't know why I said particle.
No, that can't be right. Photons are just what you and I are sending back and forth right now through these screens.
I had to look that up. I didn't know we were going down this rabbit hole tonight. I would have looked it up, but it's like it just goes haphazardly. But then if you acknowledge it, it does one other thing. But
well, there's quantum mechanics wherein when we observe things that affects the behavior, and I've spent years, of course, learning quantum mechanics as a physicist. So I relativity and quantum mechanics and a number of other areas of physics really are quite different than your ordinary intuitions about the physical world around you. But once you spend years learning them, then they become your new intuitions, and then they're no longer so strange. But quantum mechanics is still pretty strange in many ways, even when you understand it really well.
I was looking it up. Yeah, it's a particle. Okay. I wasn't crazy. I mean, I knew I'd read it somewhere. But anyway, I'll go ahead and wrap it up. I've had a lot of fun talking tonight. I needed this conversation. I've been on vacation. It kind of brought me back into the realm.
All right. Welcome back to strangeness, to the world of strangeness here.
Oh, I freaking love it. The writing, getting everything together, and the material I need to get back in. It's been about 2 weeks since I've done anything.
But there's this hard trade-off to make. I mean, some people look at strangeness and go, look, you guys are just into strangeness, and that's why you think this weird stuff. And so I'm going to be safe and believe ordinary things. And then other people think, you're so into ordinary things, you'll just believe everything's ordinary, even if we're strange. So each side can accuse the other side of being biased toward wanting to see the world one way or the other. And that means if you're trying to judge between them, there's really no escaping, like walking through the details and going, okay, you could be right, you could be right. I don't know who yet. Let's walk through step by step. Ask for each particular piece of evidence and then weigh it up at the end and say, okay, which side fits the evidence better? There's just no escaping that. You can't just go on vibes from the beginning of like, well, I'm this sort of person. I like this sort of thing. That's just not going to work.
Got it. And it'll make your head hurt when you think about it too, if you try to be one way or the other.
It's all going to make your head hurt, unfortunately. The world is just strange. That's one thing we're pretty sure of by now. The world is in fact just strange.
I'm just waiting on some kind of the next scientific advancements that shows us maybe into like a dimension like we were talking about, or some kind of wild paradigm shift that we've had.
I mean, like I told you, like an elephant in the brain, there's just wild things to realize about your own thoughts. And I've lately been thinking about culture, and it turns out there's wild things to realize about your culture and where it comes from and what it tells you. Just you're pretty gullible about your culture. It tells you all sorts of things, and you just believe it. And if you start to doubt, you'll find your head hurts realizing, oh, I've been just assuming all these things that my culture tells me are true. That's the usual thing to assume, but what if it wasn't true?
It kind of makes you feel like a bad person a little bit.
Yes, indeed. Your culture tells you are a bad person if you question it. That's one of the things your culture tells you, and one of the things you should wonder. Okay, just because my culture tells me I'm a bad person, if I doubt my culture, does that mean I shouldn't doubt my culture? I mean,
yes, I'm a bad person. It's kind of what religion does too. I'm Catholic, and it kind of does that,
right? But just because they're playing these games doesn't mean they're wrong exactly. But it does mean you gotta question them, and you gotta walk through and
I think we're supposed to question them as a human.
That's what your culture tells you too. So
oh God,
you can't trust that one either.
What is happening? This isn't real, is it? It's going to come breaking down any second. The simulation is going to end. They're going to unlock the capsule. Yeah, I listened to that TED talk as well as several other ones, and that was the one I was like, man, I'm second guessing everything at this point.
Right. Well, of course, that's sometimes something people do just to disorient people and make it easy to fool them with simple things. So you have to also be wary about being too easily disoriented. I'm a simpleton. There's a, I guess in the Meaning of Life movie by Monty Python, there's this scene I like where people come to somebody's door and says, basically, can we have your kidney? And she goes, well, no. And then he goes, let me explain two things. And he tells you the story of the universe and all these grand, huge things and how you're this tiny person and vast history. And she's just, I go, wow, look at all this stuff. And then, okay, at the end, and they say, okay, so can we have your kidney? She said, oh, I guess so.
Ended it on Monty Python.
Yeah, so, be wary of somebody who's just trying to, grab your wallet by spinning grand stories of all the wonderful things outside your view so that you decide you're not going to pay attention to the person grabbing your wallet.
That's like the unethical life hack is that if you need somebody to help you with something, you ask for something really, really complicated first, and then
you compromise.
You settle for what you actually wanted.
Exactly.
I've done that at work before.
Yeah,
I'm not gonna lie.
Other people have probably done it to you.
Yeah, I'm sure they have. That's probably why that's how I probably ended up where I'm at right now. Hey, just real quick, hit you with that one. But anyway, do you have any projects coming up besides your current your books?
Well,
Anything
I've
you
been
want to
working on cultural drift the last few months, and we have really dramatic consequences of cultural evolution that people haven't realized. So, want to talk again, I could tell you about that, but we don't really have enough time to go into that here, I guess. But
no, yeah, I've kept you 30 minutes longer than I promised now, but I didn't want to stop you because I was just sucking it in.
Happy to, but again, I'm the sort of person who has an obsession at any one time, and that's my obsession the last 4 months: cultural drift.
I think we have a lot in common when it comes to that obsession. Just something we can study ad nauseum.
Well, that's the only way, extended things ever get done. If you got bored with everything in an hour, nothing more than an hour size project would ever get done. The only way you can ever do week or year-long projects is if you have an obsession that you get into it and you keep going for that long.
Mine is this media empire, this podcast. I've called it like, I'm trying to like Oppenheimer the podcast, like make it just as hard as I could to make it go forward, and just kind of, once it just bleeds off all the energy it can, like I'd move to the next podcast.
There you go. Well, all right. Well, good luck with this podcast. And
we'll talk again when your book comes out. Let me know your next book, next project.
It'll be a while, but I'm definitely can talk about things before then. But let's see how this episode goes.
Oh yeah, I think it's going to be just fine. I'll send it to you so you can share it out and review it when I get done editing it down. I'll take out the parts for the packet loss and everything.
Sorry about that. Yeah,
it's okay. It seemed to have settled down.
All right, well then, good night, Bobby.
All right, see you. I'll hit my theme music and you take it easy. Thanks for coming on, man.
I never didn't believe in Bigfoot. I never believed in it, I didn't believe in it. I never gave it any thought.
They kept wood knocking back and forth to each other, and it was in a pattern.
Barn owls don't typically throw rocks.
I come across these tracks.
Sasquatch is still not on my mind.